The salt wind carried whispers of loneliness across Outer Banks Beach as Serafina Langford stood at the edge of the water, letting the waves lap at her bare feet. She was 34 years old, the CEO of a $200 million tech company, and she had never felt more invisible in her entire life. Around her, families laughed and played. Children built sandcastles while their parents watched with easy smiles. Couples walked hand in hand along the shoreline, lost in each other. And Sarah stood alone, her designer sundress fluttering in the breeze, her phone heavy in her pocket with 47 unread work emails and not a single personal message. 3 years had passed since Griffin died. 3 years since she had felt anything other than the cold efficiency required to run his company. 3 years since anyone had looked at her and seen something other than a widow, a CEO, a woman made of ice and ambition. She closed her eyes and listened to the ocean, trying to remember the last time she had taken a breath that did not feel like drowning. A small body collided with her legs. Sarah stumbled, catching herself just in time to see a little girl sprawled on the sand before her. The child looked up with enormous hazel eyes, her honey blonde hair tangled with salt and wind. She was perhaps 7 years old with scraped knees in a faded yellow sundress. But she did not cry. She did not make a sound. Instead, her small hands began to move, fingers dancing through the air in patterns Sarah could not understand. The child's face was earnest, almost desperate, as if she were speaking words that Sarah simply could not hear, because she could not hear them. The girl was not speaking at all. Sarah knelt down, her heart suddenly tight. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Are you hurt?" The girl's hands moved faster, more frantically. Her eyes searched Sarah's face for understanding and found none. Something in her expression crumpled. That particular kind of defeat that comes from being unable to make yourself understood. Sarah knew that feeling intimately. Running footsteps approached. A man's voice called out, breathless with worry. "Ren! Ren! Are you all right?" He appeared like something out of a half-forgotten dream. Tall and weathered, with kind brown eyes and the sort of face that had clearly known both great joy and great sorrow. He wore faded jeans and a simple white t-shirt, and when he knelt beside the little girl, his hands began to move in the same fluid patterns. The child's face transformed instantly. Relief flooded her features as her own hands responded, a rapid conversation passing between them in complete silence. Sarah watched, transfixed. She had never seen anything so beautiful. An entire language spoken without a single word. The man looked up at her, and something in his gaze made Sarah's breath catch. He was not looking at her designer clothes or her expensive sunglasses or the subtle signs of wealth that usually made people treat her differently. He was looking at her like she was simply a person, a human being who had stopped to help his child. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm and rough like honey over gravel, "for stopping. Most people just walk past." "Is she all right?" "Just a scraped knee. Ren is tougher than she looks." He smiled, and the expression carved deep lines around his eyes, lines that spoke of laughter long past. "She was trying to tell you she's sorry for running into you, and that she likes your dress." Sarah looked down at the child, at those earnest hazel eyes still watching her with curiosity rather than fear. "She can't speak?" "Ren hears everything," the man said gently. "She just can't speak back. Not with her voice anyway." His hands moved as he spoke, including his daughter in the conversation. "She was born with vocal cord paralysis, but she has plenty to say. Don't you, sweetheart?" The little girl nodded vigorously, her hands flying again in animated response. The man laughed softly and translated, "She says you look sad. She wants to know if you're lost." The question hit Sarah like a wave she had not seen coming. Her throat tightened, and she found herself unable to explain to a child that she had been lost for years, that she had wandered through her own life like a ghost, present but never truly there. that she had forgotten what it felt like to be found. "I'm fine," she managed, though the words felt hollow. The little girl tilted her head, clearly unconvinced. Her hands moved again, slower this time, as if she were choosing her words with great care. The man's smile softened into something achingly tender. "She says she doesn't believe you, but that's okay. She says sometimes people need time to find their way home." A second child came running up, a boy of about 6 with the same brown eyes as the man and a gap-toothed grin that radiated pure joy. "Dad, Dad, I found a sand dollar. A whole one. Can we keep it?" "Let me see, Sawyer." The man examined the shell with appropriate gravity. "That's a beauty. We'll put it with the others." He stood, lifting Wren easily onto his hip, and extended his free hand to Sarah. "I'm Callahan, Cal, and you've already met my interrogation committee." Sarah took his hand. His palm was warm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked with them for a living. "Serafina. Sarah. Beautiful name." He said it simply, without flattery, and somehow that made it mean more than all the compliments she had ever received at corporate galas. "Thank you again for stopping, for being kind to her." "She's remarkable," Sarah said, and meant it with her whole heart. "They both are." Wren tugged at her father's shirt and signed something, her small face alight with hope. Cal's eyebrows rose slightly, and he looked at Sarah with a new curiosity. "She wants to know if you'd like to learn how to talk to her. She says she could teach you if you want." Sarah stared at the child, at this small person who had seen through her careful armor in less than 5 minutes. A door she thought was sealed forever creaked open somewhere deep inside her chest. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. "I'd like that very much." They sat together on the sand as the afternoon light mellowed into gold. Cal showed her basic signs while Sawyer collected shells nearby, and Wren watched with the intensity of a born teacher, correcting Sarah's finger positions with patient persistence. "This means hello. This means thank you. This means beautiful." Sarah's hands felt clumsy, foreign to her. She had commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals with unwavering confidence, but she had never felt so uncertain as she did now, trying to shape her fingers into words for a 7-year-old girl. "Don't worry," Cal said, his voice patient as the tide. "Wren learned by watching videos online for months before anyone knew. She's used to beginners." "She taught herself?" Kids are remarkable that way. They find ways to communicate even when the world doesn't make it easy for them. There was something in his tone, a depth of feeling that made Sarah look at him more closely. "You seem to know a lot about this." "I used to teach sign language at a school for deaf children in Raleigh." He paused, his hand stilling on his lap. That was before. Before. The word hung between them, heavy with everything it contained. "Before what?" Cal was quiet for a long moment, watching his children play at the water's edge. When he spoke, his voice was softer, worn smooth by countless repetitions of this painful story. "My wife, Delphine, she passed 2 years ago. Cancer." He said it simply, without drama, but Sarah could see the weight of it in the set of his shoulders, in the way his hands unconsciously formed the sign for her name. "After she died, I couldn't stay in our house anymore. Everything reminded me of her. So I sold what we had, packed up the kids, and started traveling, selling handmade things to tourists. Beach towns mostly." "I'm so sorry." Delphine used to say that sign language isn't the language of silence. It's the language of the heart. He smiled at the memory, distant but warm. She was right about most things. Sarah felt walls she had built for years begin to crumble. Here was a man who had lost everything, who had walked through the fire of grief and come out the other side still capable of tenderness, still capable of teaching his daughter that the world was worth talking to. "My husband died 3 years ago," she said, surprising herself with the confession. She never talked about Griffin, not to anyone. "Car accident." Cal looked at her, really looked, And in his eyes, she saw not pity, but recognition. The understanding of someone who knew exactly what it felt like to have your world rearrange itself around an absence. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. And then, with genuine concern, "How are you?" Really? No one had asked her that question in 3 years. Not her board of directors, not her assistant, not her mother-in-law who blamed her for Griffin's death. Everyone asked how the company was doing, how the quarterly earnings looked, how she was managing the transition. No one asked how she was. "I don't know," she admitted, the honesty raw in her throat. "I've been so busy surviving that I forgot to check." Wren had been watching their conversation intently, her eyes moving between their faces with uncanny perception. Now she tugged at Sarah's sleeve and signed something, her small face serious with the weight of important words. Cal's voice gentled as he translated. "She says that her mom told her something before she died. She says broken hearts don't need to be fixed. They just need to be loved while they're still broken." The words landed somewhere deep inside Sarah, in a place she had thought was empty and cold. Her vision blurred, and she did not try to hide the emotion that overtook her. "Your daughter is very wise," she managed through the ache in her chest. "She gets it from her mother." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Sarah could not remember the last time silence had felt comfortable. In her world, silence meant something was wrong. It meant someone was plotting, calculating, waiting for weakness. But here, with the waves whispering against the shore, and two children playing nearby, and a kind-eyed stranger who expected nothing from her, silence felt like peace. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, reality intruding, demanding attention. She ignored it for the first time in years. "Can I see you again?" The question escaped before she could stop it, before she could remind herself that she was Serafina Langford, CEO, and she did not ask men she had just met on beaches if she could see them again. Cal smiled, and for a moment he looked younger, lighter, like a man who had rediscovered something he thought he had lost. "We're here most afternoons. Wren likes this stretch of beach. She says the waves talk to her. Then I'll come back tomorrow." She exchanged numbers with him, her fingers brushing his as she handed back his phone. The contact sent electricity singing through her system, and she realized that human touch had become foreign to her, a language she had forgotten how to speak. As she gathered her things to leave, Wren ran up and threw her arms around Sarah's waist in a fierce, unexpected hug. Then she stepped back and signed something, her face glowing with innocent joy. "She says see you tomorrow, friend," Cal translated, his voice warm with affection. Friend. The word felt strange, almost mythical, like something from a life she had lived long ago and barely remembered. She was almost to the parking lot when a black Mercedes pulled up beside her with predatory precision. The door opened, and her stomach turned to ice. Preston Kincaid stepped out, silver-haired and impeccably dressed in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His smile was as cold as a January wind cutting through thin clothing. "Serafina." He said her name like he owned it, like he owned her. "I've been looking for you everywhere. We need to talk about Griffin's legacy." Sarah's hands curled into fists at her sides, hidden in the folds of her dress. "We have nothing to discuss." "Oh, but we do." His eyes slid past her, toward the beach where Cal was gathering the children, preparing to leave. "Making new friends, I see. How touching. A vendor and his children. Quite a step down from your usual circles." "Leave, Preston, now." "I'll leave when I'm ready." He stepped closer, and his voice dropped to a silky threat that made her skin crawl. "Remember, Sarah, I know things about you, about the night Griffin died, things you wouldn't want to become public." Her blood ran cold in her veins. "That's right," he continued, clearly enjoying her fear like fine wine. "I have the recording. Every word of your little argument. You didn't know Griffin called me that night, did you? He was upset, ranting about the fight. He left his phone on speaker while he drove, and I recorded every word. Insurance, I called it then. Now I call it leverage. His smile widened at her stricken expression. Including the part where you told him you wished he would disappear. And then he did. How terribly convenient for you. That's not what happened. It wasn't like that at all. Maybe not. But do you think anyone will believe you? Do you think your precious board of directors will keep you on when they hear what kind of wife you really were? Cal was walking toward the parking lot now, Sawyer's hand in his, Wren balanced on his hip. He had seen the Mercedes, the tension in Sarah's posture, and his brow was furrowed with protective concern. Preston followed her gaze and laughed softly, a sound like broken glass. $2 million, Serafina. Transfer it to my account, and the recording stays private forever. Otherwise, he shrugged elegantly, as if discussing the weather. Well, I'm sure your new friends would love to know who they've been spending their precious time with. He got back in his car and drove away, leaving Sarah standing in the parking lot, with her heart pounding against her ribs and her past closing in around her like a fist. Cal approached carefully, reading her face with gentle concern. Are you okay? Who was that man? Sarah forced herself to smile, though it felt like wearing a mask made of broken glass. No one important, just business. But when she looked into his kind eyes, she knew he did not believe her. And she knew that the fragile peace she had found on that beach was about to be shattered. 4 weeks passed like a fever dream of possibility and healing. Every afternoon, Sarah drove to the beach, having delegated more responsibilities than ever before. Her board of directors found this surprising, but not unwelcome. Take some time, her VP had urged during their last meeting. You haven't had a real break in 3 years. She did not correct him. This was not a vacation. This was something far more important than any business deal she had ever negotiated. Every afternoon, Cal was there waiting with Wren and Sawyer, with patience and laughter, and hands that spoke a language she was slowly learning to understand with growing fluency. She learned to sign hello and beautiful and ocean. She learned to sign friend and happy and family. And every time Wren's face lit up at being understood, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a flower unfurling toward sun after years in shadow. Cal told her stories about Delphine during their quiet moments together, about how they had met in college when he was studying to be an engineer, and she was majoring in audiology, about how she had changed his entire trajectory, showing him that communication was not about words, but about genuine connection, about how she had taught him sign language not because he needed it, but because she wanted to share every part of herself with him. She used to sign to Wren even before Wren was born, Cal said one evening, as they watched the sun sink into the sea like a burning coin. She would press her hands against her belly and spell out words of love. I thought she was crazy at the time. She sounds wonderful. She was the best person I ever knew. She made me believe that goodness wasn't naive, that kindness wasn't weakness. His voice was soft with memory, with love that death could not diminish. She would have liked you, Sarah. She always knew how to see past the armor people wear. Sarah found herself telling him about Griffin too, letting the words flow like water finding its course. About how they had built the company together, how his vision and her business sense had created something neither of them could have made alone. About the good years before success changed everything, before the long hours and the stress and the distance that had grown between them like an invisible wall. She did not tell him about the night Griffin died. Not yet. That wound was still too raw, still too dangerous to expose. But she told him about the loneliness that had followed, about the empty penthouse and the endless board meetings and the feeling of being surrounded by people who wanted something from her without ever actually seeing her as a human being. I used to dream about being important, she admitted one evening, about having power, making decisions that mattered, being someone who counted. I never realized how lonely it would be at the top of that mountain. Cal reached over and took her hand without hesitation. His palm was warm, rough with honest work, and the contact sent a current of electricity singing through her veins. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply, and the words felt like a promise. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah believed it might be true. Ren became her shadow, her tiny teacher, her unexpected gift. The child possessed a wisdom that defied her 7 years, an understanding of human nature that made Sarah wonder what depths existed behind those observant hazel eyes. Ren would watch Sarah with that serious gaze and see straight through every wall, every defense, every carefully constructed facade. One afternoon, Sarah arrived at the beach looking exhausted, hollowed out by another sleepless night worrying about Preston and his threats. She thought she had hidden it well beneath makeup and a carefully composed expression. She was wrong. Ren tugged at her hand and signed something, her small face creased with concern. "She says you're scared," Cal translated, his brow furrowing. "She wants to know if she can help." Sarah knelt down to Ren's level, meeting those knowing eyes. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just some grown-up problems that I need to figure out." Ren's hands moved again with deliberate care, and Cal's voice softened as he translated the words. "She says her dad told her that brave people aren't people who aren't scared. Brave people are people who are scared, but do the right thing anyway." The words hit Sarah like a revelation breaking through storm clouds. She had been so paralyzed by fear of Preston, of exposure, of losing everything she had worked for, that she had forgotten she still had choices. She could keep running, keep paying, keep living under his thumb forever, or she could be brave. "Your daughter is going to change the world someday," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Cal smiled with quiet pride. "She already changed mine." Sawyer, with his gap-toothed grin and boundless energy, decided that Sarah needed to learn the truly important things in life: how to build the perfect sandcastle with proper structural integrity, how to find unbroken shells among the broken ones, and how to make a wish on the evening star. "You have to close your eyes really, really tight," he instructed with absolute seriousness. "And you have to wish for something real, not something silly like $1 million or a sports car." "What counts as silly?" "Money, toys, stuff like that." He waved dismissively as if such concerns were beneath consideration. "Real wishes are about people, about family, about being together." "That's very wise for someone your age. Mom told me that before she went to heaven." His voice was matter-of-fact, the way children speak of death before they learn to fear it. "She said wishes only work if you put love in them. Otherwise, they're just words floating in the air." Sarah looked at Cal over Sawyer's head and saw her own emotion reflected in his eyes. These children, shaped by loss and love in equal measure, had more to teach her than any MBA program, any leadership seminar, any corporate retreat she had ever attended. "Can I tell you a secret?" Sawyer asked, dropping his voice to a theatrical whisper. "Of course. I wished for a new mom, not to replace my real mom, because Dad says she's always in our hearts forever and ever, but someone new to be part of our family." He looked up at her with those guileless brown eyes full of hope and trust. "I think maybe you're what I wished for." Something inside Sarah cracked open, but not painfully. It felt more like ice breaking up in spring, like a river finally running free after a long frozen winter. She should have known the peace would not last forever. Preston returned like a recurring nightmare that no amount of waking could dispel. He appeared at the coffee shop where she had stopped on her way to the beach, sliding into the seat across from her, uninvited, his smile sharp as a blade. "2 weeks, Serafina. You have 2 weeks to transfer the money, or I start making calls to people who would be very interested in what I know." "Why are you doing this?" She kept her voice low, controlled, even though her hands were trembling beneath the table. "You embezzled $3 million from my company. I should be the one threatening you. Ah, but you won't. He stirred his coffee with lazy confidence, like a cat playing with its prey. Because you're too afraid of what I know, of what I can prove about that night. You can't prove anything. It was a private conversation between a husband and wife. Recordings don't lie, Sarah. I wish you would disappear. Your exact words captured forever. Said in anger, yes, but words have weight, especially when the person you said them to dies hours later on a rain-slicked road. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. How do you think that will play in the press? Grieving widow or vindictive wife who drove her husband to his death? Sarah felt sick, her coffee turning to acid in her stomach. It wasn't like that. We argued, yes. Every couple argues sometimes, but I didn't mean... Of course you didn't mean it literally. But meaning doesn't matter in the court of public opinion, does it? Perception is everything. He stood, smoothing his immaculate jacket. 2 weeks, $2 million. Think about it carefully. He left her sitting there with cold coffee and colder fear, the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. That night, she told Cal everything. They sat on the porch of his rented cottage while the children slept peacefully inside, and Sarah let the words pour out like poison from a wound that had festered for 3 long years. The argument with Griffin, the terrible things she had said in anger, the way he had stormed out into the rain and never come back. I told him I wished he would disappear, she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. I didn't mean it. I was angry and hurt, and I said the worst thing I could think of to wound him. And then he was gone. Forever. And I've spent 3 years wondering if it was my fault, if my words somehow caused it, if I killed my husband with a moment of cruelty. Cal was quiet for a long moment, his profile outlined against the stars. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough with his own grief. The night before Delphine died, I was angry too. She kept talking about what would happen after she was gone, making lists and giving instructions, and I couldn't stand it. I told her to stop being dramatic. I said she was going to be fine, that she needed to stop scaring me and the kids. He took a shaky breath, the memory clearly painful. She died the next morning, and my last words to her were a lie. I knew she wasn't going to be fine. I just couldn't face it. I couldn't be brave enough to say goodbye. Sarah reached for his hand, and he gripped it like a lifeline in a storming sea. We all say things we don't mean when we're scared, he continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. That doesn't mean we caused what happened. Griffin's accident wasn't your fault, just like Delphine's cancer wasn't mine. We're not that powerful, Sarah. We can't kill people with our words, no matter how much our guilt wants us to believe we can. But the guilt is real. Believe me, I know. But guilt doesn't equal responsibility. They're not the same thing, even though they feel the same in the dark hours of the night. He turned to face her fully, his eyes fierce with conviction. You didn't kill your husband, Sarah. You had a fight, like every couple in the world has fights. What happened after was a tragedy, not a punishment for your words. She was crying now, tears she had held back for 3 years, finally breaking free like a dam giving way. Cal pulled her into his arms and held her as she sobbed against his chest, his hands stroking her hair with infinite gentleness, his presence steady and sure as bedrock. Preston is using your guilt against you, he said when her tears had finally slowed. He knows you feel responsible, and he's weaponizing that knowledge. But you don't have to let him control you anymore. He has the recording. If he releases it, then you tell the truth, the whole truth. You made a mistake, said something terrible in the heat of anger. You're human. People understand that more than you think. He pulled back to look at her, his hands cradling her face. You're not going to let him blackmail you forever. You're stronger than that. I've seen your strength, even when you can't see it yourself. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about feelings. It's about choices. He smiled slightly, a glimmer of warmth breaking through. A very wise 7-year-old taught me that. Sarah laughed through her tears, and something in her chest loosened, a knot that had been tied for 3 years finally beginning to unravel. After a long moment, Sarah spoke again, her voice tentative. Cal, earlier when Cordelia was here, you said something about the woman you love. Cal met her eyes without hesitation. I said I love you, and I meant every word. We've only known each other for long enough. He moved closer, taking her hands in his calloused ones. I've learned that life is too short to wait for the perfect moment. Delphine taught me that. I love you, Sarah. Not because you're perfect, not because we've had time to figure everything out, not because it makes logical sense. I love you because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be alive. Really alive, not just going through the motions. Something broke open inside Sarah. Not painfully, but like a flower unfurling toward the sun after too long in shadow. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have loved you since the moment you translated Ren's words on that beach. Since the moment you looked at me like I was a person, not a problem to be solved. He kissed her then, soft and tender and full of promise. And Sarah felt the first real hope she had known in 3 years, blooming in her chest like spring after an endless winter. She was not prepared for Cordelia. Her mother-in-law arrived at the beach house unannounced the following week. Steel gray hair, perfectly coiffed, designer suit, immaculate despite the coastal humidity. She surveyed the modest rental cottage, the children playing in the yard. Cal standing protectively nearby, and her lips thinned with familiar disapproval. Serafina, I heard you've been keeping interesting company. Cordelia, Sarah kept her voice carefully neutral. What are you doing here? I came to talk sense into you before you destroy everything my son built. Cordelia swept into the cottage like she owned it, surveying the simple furnishings with barely concealed disdain. A beach vendor? Children? Is this really how you honor Griffin's memory? Is this what he would have wanted for you? Griffin would want me to be happy. Griffin would want you to protect his company, not frolic on the beach with what? Cal's voice was quiet but firm as granite. With someone who actually cares about her, with children who see her as a person instead of a business asset or a widow to be managed? Cordelia's eyes narrowed dangerously. This is a private conversation, not when you're insulting the woman I love in my home. Silence fell like a hammer. Sarah stared at Cal, her heart racing. He had said it again, in front of Cordelia, without hesitation or embarrassment. Love. You don't know anything about our family, Cordelia said coldly, her composure cracking slightly. About our obligations, our responsibilities. I know that your son is dead and you've spent 3 years blaming the wrong person. Cal's voice held no anger, only a terrible gentleness that cut deeper than any accusation. I know what it's like to lose someone and need somewhere to put the pain. But punishing Sarah won't bring Griffin back. Nothing will. Something flickered in Cordelia's carefully controlled face, a crack in the armor she had worn for so long. You don't understand, she said, and her voice was suddenly smaller, older, more fragile. I lost my son, my only child, and she was the last one to see him, the last one to talk to him. And you think that makes it her fault. Someone has to be responsible. Someone has to pay for what happened. Cal shook his head slowly, with infinite compassion. No, sometimes terrible things happen, and there's no one to blame. Sometimes we just lose the people we love for no reason at all, and we have to find a way to survive it without destroying ourselves or each other. Cordelia was crying now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Sarah had never seen her mother-in-law cry, not even at Griffin's funeral. She had been a pillar of ice through all of it, holding everything together through sheer force of will. "I miss him so much," Cordelia whispered, her voice raw with grief. "Every single day, every hour." Sarah moved forward, hesitant but compelled. "I miss him too." "I know you do." Cordelia looked at her, really looked, perhaps for the first time since Griffin's death. "I know you loved him. I was just so angry and you were there. And I needed someone to blame because blaming myself was unbearable." "I understand." And Sarah realized that she truly did. Grief made people do terrible things, say terrible things. She knew that bitter truth better than anyone. "There's something you should know." Cordelia wiped her eyes with trembling fingers, her composure slowly returning. "Preston Kincaid came to me. He told me about the recording, about what you said the night Griffin died. He offered to share it with me if I would support him in removing you from the company." Sarah's blood turned to ice. And? And I told him no." Cordelia's voice hardened with sudden steel. "Whatever you said to Griffin that night, you were his wife. You loved him. I saw that every day, even when I didn't want to admit it." She paused, gathering herself. "But there's more. Preston has been embezzling from the company for years. I discovered it 6 months after Griffin died, but he threatened to release the recording if I exposed him. I've been silent because I was afraid of the scandal, afraid of losing what little I had left of my son's legacy. You have proof? I have everything. Bank records, transfer receipts, emails, all carefully documented. He thought I was too grief-stricken to notice, but I am still a Langford." Sarah stared at her mother-in-law, seeing her in a completely new light. Not an enemy, but an unexpected ally. Not a villain, but a grieving mother who had made mistakes and was finally ready to make them right. "Will you help me stop him?" Cordelia straightened her spine, and for a moment Sarah saw the steel that had helped build an empire. "It would be my absolute pleasure." The shareholders' meeting was standing room only. 200 people packed into the Langford Technologies Conference Center. Board members, investors, journalists, and curious employees all waited to see what Serafina Langford would announce. Rumors had been swirling for days about what this emergency meeting might reveal. A resignation, some whispered. A merger, said others. Preston Kincaid sat in the front row, confident and impeccably dressed, certain that this was the day Sarah would finally crumble. He had given her his final ultimatum just that morning. Step down and pay, or face complete public humiliation. She had smiled and said nothing, which should have worried him more than it did. Now she stood at the podium, Cal and the children watching from the back of the room, and she felt strangely calm. The fear that had gripped her for weeks had burned away, leaving only clarity and determination. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I have an important announcement regarding the future of Langford Technologies. But first, I'd like to show you something." The screen behind her flickered to life. Security footage, date-stamped and undeniably clear, showed Preston Kincaid in his office late at night, transferring funds between accounts with practiced efficiency. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "This is footage of our former CFO, Preston Kincaid, embezzling company funds. Over the past 5 years, Mr. Kincaid has systematically stolen over $3 million from Langford Technologies." Preston was on his feet, face white with shock. "This is ridiculous. These records are obviously falsified. Perhaps you'd also like to see the text messages you sent me." Sarah clicked to the next slide with calm precision. Screenshots filled the screen. Demands for $2 million, threats to release private recordings, explicit promises of destruction. This is what blackmail looks like, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Kincaid has been using personal information to extort money, not just from me, but from other members of this company who were too frightened to come forward. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Board members shouted questions. Reporters scrambled for their phones, and Preston Kincaid stood frozen in the middle of it all, his carefully constructed empire of lies crumbling around him. Two security guards appeared at his sides. "Preston Kincaid," one of them said formally, "you are being detained pending investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and extortion." "You can't do this to me," Preston sputtered, his composure finally shattering. "I have the recording. I'll release it. Everyone will know." "Know what?" Sarah's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. "That I had an argument with my husband before he died? That I said something terrible in anger? Something I've regretted every single day for 3 years?" She stepped out from behind the podium, facing him directly with courage she had not known she possessed. "Release it. I'm done being afraid of the truth." The room went absolutely silent. "I love my husband," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I loved him imperfectly, the way real people love, with frustration and anger and sometimes cruel words we don't mean. I made mistakes. I said things I regret, and I have carried the guilt of that night like a stone around my neck ever since." She took a breath, feeling the weight begin to lift. "But guilt is not the same as responsibility. My words did not cause Griffin's accident, and I will not let you use my grief as a weapon against me anymore." Preston's face twisted with impotent rage as security led him toward the door. "You'll regret this. Both of you. All of you." But Sarah was no longer looking at him. She was looking at the back of the room, where Cal stood with Wren on his hip and Sawyer at his side. Wren was signing something, her small hands moving with excited emphasis. Sarah had learned enough now to understand every word. "You did it. You were so brave. I'm proud of you." She smiled through the tears that finally came, tears of relief and release rather than grief. The aftermath was swift and merciless, as justice often is. Preston Kincaid was arrested that evening on multiple charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of fraudulent transfers, a documented pattern of blackmail targeting multiple executives, even connections to other corporate crimes that investigators were only beginning to unravel. He would spend the next 7 years in federal prison, his reputation utterly destroyed, his power stripped away completely. But Sarah barely noticed the legal proceedings. She was too busy learning what it meant to truly live again. 1 year later, the beach looked exactly as it had the day they first met. Same golden sand stretching toward the horizon, same rolling waves keeping their eternal rhythm, same afternoon light that turned everything to honey and amber. But everything else had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Sarah walked barefoot along the shore, her hand clasped warmly in Cal's, watching Wren and Sawyer race ahead of them toward the water with joyful abandon. She wore a simple sundress and no makeup, her designer heels long since abandoned for the pleasure of sand between her toes. On her left hand, a ring caught the afternoon sunlight. Not a diamond, not anything expensive or ostentatious. Just a simple band of silver and sea glass that Cal had made himself, with a tiny sandcastle carved into the surface. "Do you remember exactly where we were standing?" he asked. "The very first time." "Right about there." She pointed to a spot near the water's edge. "I was wondering how a person could feel so completely alone in such a beautiful place." "And now?" She turned to look at him, at this man who had found her broken and loved her anyway, who had taught her that healing was not about forgetting pain, but about making room for joy alongside it. "Now I can't imagine feeling alone ever again." Wren came running back, breathless with excitement, her face glowing with happiness. She signed something, her hands moving with the fluid grace of someone who had been speaking this language her entire life. "She says she finished her picture," Cal translated, though Sarah had understood every gesture. "She wants to show us." They walked to where Wren had been drawing in the wet sand. There, etched in careful lines with a child's precision, were 4 figures holding hands. 2 tall, 2 small, a family. Wren looked up at Sarah and signed again, slower this time, making sure every word was perfectly clear. Mama, I drew our family. Sarah knelt in the sand, her eyes filling with tears. It was the first time Wren had called her that, the first time anyone had ever called her that word. It's beautiful, sweetheart, she managed through the emotion overwhelming her. It's absolutely perfect. Wren threw her arms around Sarah's neck and hugged her with fierce intensity. Sawyer piled on immediately, never one to be left out of group affection, and Cal knelt down to wrap his arms around all of them. They stayed like that for a long moment, the four of them tangled together on the beach where it had all begun, where two broken families had somehow become whole. Finally, Cal spoke. Wren, do you remember what we talked about? About Mama Delphine? Wren pulled back and signed, her face solemn with the weight of sacred words she had been waiting to share. Love doesn't fix broken things, Mama. Love makes broken things beautiful. It was a new wisdom, her own this time, and Sarah realized with wonder that Wren had grown so much. She was no longer just echoing her mother's words. She was creating her own truths, her own understanding of the world. That's beautiful, sweetheart. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Cordelia appeared at the top of the beach path, picking her way carefully down the sand in sensible flats. A far cry from the Chanel suits of before, but she had changed in other ways too. Softened, learned to let go of blame, and embrace what remained. I brought something for Wren, she called out, her voice warmer than it had ever been. In her hands was a carefully wrapped package. They gathered around as Wren opened it with eager fingers, revealing an old, well-worn book. Sign language illustrations filled the pages, the corners soft with decades of use. This was Griffin's, Cordelia explained, her voice catching with emotion. When he was young, he had a friend who was deaf. He learned to sign so they could talk together, so his friend wouldn't feel so alone. She knelt beside Wren, her eyes glistening. I thought he would want you to have it. I think he would be so happy to know it's being used again. Wren clutched the book to her chest, then threw her arms around Cordelia in a spontaneous hug. The older woman stiffened in surprise, then melted into the embrace with visible relief. Sawyer tugged at Sarah's hand with his usual urgency. Is Grandma Cordelia a part of our family now, too? Sarah looked at Cal, who smiled and nodded with warm approval. Yes, sweetheart, she is. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in magnificent shades of rose and gold and deepening purple, the five of them stood together at the water's edge. Wren began to sign, her movements slow and deliberate, and this time everyone gathered understood her completely. The waves were talking today. They were saying something really important. What were they saying? Cal asked, wrapping his arm around Sarah's waist. Wren smiled, that radiant smile that had first captured Sarah's heart on a beach just like this one, in a moment that had changed everything. They were saying that broken things can become beautiful, that endings can become beginnings, that families aren't made from perfect pieces. They're made from love. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face and did nothing to stop them. These were not tears of grief, not anymore. These were tears of gratitude, of wonder, of a joy so profound it could not be contained within her heart. Cal took her hand. Sawyer grabbed her other one with sticky fingers. Wren linked arms with Cordelia. And together they walked along the shore as the sun set behind them in a blaze of color and light. 5 people who had lost everything. 5 people who had found each other. The waves whispered their eternal song against the sand. The evening star appeared in the darkening sky, ready to receive wishes made with love. And somewhere, Sarah knew with absolute certainty, Delphine and Griffin were watching over them, finally at peace. In the end, the little girl had been right from the very beginning. Sarah had been lost, wandering through her own life without direction or purpose. But she had found her way home, not to a place, to a family. and she would never be alone again. On screen, Preston Kincaid was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for embezzlement, fraud, and extortion. Langford Technologies established a $1 million fund supporting children with communication disabilities. Serafina founded the Delphine Whitmore Scholarship, providing free sign language education to families of nonverbal children across the country. And on the beach where two broken hearts first met, a sandcastle still stands, rebuilt every summer by the family who calls it home. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones we speak without sound. Sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones we never expected to receive. And sometimes the hearts that are broken the widest become the ones that hold the most love.